Hello and welcome to my podcast, U2B's Do Count, with me, Dean James. You're listening to episode number 2, I Used to Be a Writer, the pilot episode. In this episode, I speak with Liam Hobbs about the pressure he felt and self-doubt he experienced whilst trying to finish and publish his first novel.
This was the future that I wanted, and it was a total failure. So I just didn't deserve to be associated with it.
Now, I must make a confession here. This episode was recorded with no intention of publishing. Liam is a friend of mine, and he kindly agreed to help me out during a testing period in the lead up to launching this podcast. I needed to test all of the equipment, so I wanted to get the format right, and I wanted to get into the swing of asking questions and having honest conversations. Liam, being an absolute hero, said, "Of course, no problem, I'll gladly oblige." But what pursued was honest, important conversations around personal struggle and a person's transition, which I felt would do him a disservice, as well as you, the listeners, if I didn't put it out there. So I asked his permission, of course, and again, he kindly agreed to publish it as a pilot episode. And so, without further ado, here it is. Hello, Liam. Thank you so much for coming on my podcast. My very first episode as well. How are you feeling?
I feel very special.
Good, yeah.
Nice to be someone's first.
For a change, you mean?
Yeah.
No, honestly, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. So this is obviously U2B's Do Count. But for those of you who don't know you, you're Liam Hobbs. You are a customer service representative. Would you say a customer service officer for the local authority?
I think I'm a customer service everything.
Okay.
But officially just a customer service worker. Yeah.
Customer service worker.
Authority, yeah.
Yeah, for your local authority. So that's what you're doing now, and we are going to talk about what you're doing now for sure. But obviously, because the podcast is called U2B's Do Count, we do want to focus on what you used to be. So what was your used to be?
So once upon a time, a long, long time ago, which is actually roughly 7 years ago, I used to be a writer. Ever since I was quite small, I was always reading. It was like the biggest passion in my life for a very long time. I was called a bookworm in school, and they weren't wrong. Everywhere I go, I'd always have my head stuck in a book. And then as I got older and sort of, started to creatively write and sort of express myself more and wanted to create more instead of only consuming, I finally wanted to write a book. And that's what I did. I used to be a writer.
So your used to be was I used to be a writer, but I just want to touch upon the fact that you were a real life Belle from Beauty and the Beast, but the male version. I just pictured you walking around constantly having your head in a book. You were actually that. Was it that extreme? Were you always reading? Were you reading to stop any social interaction or social sort of engagements?
I think there's a few reasons. So I was very introverted and I didn't talk much. And if you're reading, no one tends to bother you. They don't want to disturb you. I find that even now if I'm reading on a train or something, people try not to disturb you because they're sort of socially afraid of interrupting you. So yeah, when I was a child, that was probably one of the ulterior motives, but I think really I was just so compelled to read. I just found fiction, non-fiction, I just found reading itself to be a really fulfilling activity. What
did you find about reading that was something that you were drawn to at such a young age?
It's a very difficult question. I think half of it is nature and the other half is nurture. I think I've always been, out of my family, I've always been very into reading. And as people notice that, they kind of, emphasise that. So I was known to always be reading. I'd always have a book on me. They'd buy me books for birthdays and Christmases and for any occasion, really. And fun isn't hard when you have a library card. So I was constantly at my local library.
I like that.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I was constantly at my local library and got to know my school librarian quite well. I was probably the only kid who visited the library that didn't just go play computer games. I was just constantly checking books out. As to what started it though, it's kind of asking me, why did I start breathing? It's just something I've always done. I can't really tell you why, other than I just do.
It was just completely natural as breathing. You just took to it so naturally. That's amazing. That's really interesting. So I've already now discovered that reading became your identity. People were almost describing Liam as, oh, Liam's the reader. He loves books. He's got a library card. Let's buy him books for his birthday, for Christmas and stuff. That almost becomes part of your identity label, your identity makeup. Is the reinforcement from adults. So when did the reading then turn into writing?
So, like most people in school, during English, you have some kind of creative writing. And I think because I read so much, I was able to draw from lots of different inspirations. So I remember very heavily, not say copying, maybe honouring the book that I really enjoyed as a child in one of my English creative writing assessments. And my teacher found it really almost inspirational. He put it on the board for other people to read in terms of like the characterization. And even though that was like almost blatantly copying an author, I think that sort of feeling of validation definitely encouraged me to write more, especially my own work. So, but really, you know, that was like around the age of, I don't know, year 7 or year 8, so about 11 or 12, that sort of time period.
Nice. And you got that like positive affirmation from the teacher straight away, from like somebody that was a role model. And then you got that positive affirmation that put you in the spotlight. Reading took you away from the spotlight, because when you're reading, no one bothers you, in your own words.
Absolutely.
But writing put you in the spotlight, from your teacher actually saying, writing it up on the board and saying, everyone should read this, Liam's done a great job.
Absolutely, yeah. So my English teacher in secondary school was like, I think he didn't even know how highly I held him in regard, and I really respected him, and I really, really enjoyed his lessons. He was such a passionate teacher.
That's lovely. That's lovely.
And I think a lot of people, you know, if they don't have a great teacher, the opposite effect happens, where they don't like reading. So many adults don't read a book past the age of, you know, school. They've only ever been forced to read things they're not interested in.
Absolutely.
My little brother as well, he's finished school, he's 19, and, you know, I'm always trying to make him read a book, trying to encourage him, because obviously it's such a huge passion of mine lifelong. But he's just completely the opposite, no interest whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's okay.
That's okay. Brothers, siblings, they're usually opposites, like that. So that was your earliest memory of writing something that you significantly got credit and affirmation for, which was plagiarism, but that's fine.
Yeah,
How did that spring?
Said that good artists create, but great artists steal.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I think he kind of knew what he was talking about, didn't he? Picasso, I don't know.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So when did you then start creating your own stories and writing them down? When did you start doing that? Soon after, was it?
No. So it wasn't until I was in my final year of college, really.
Okay.
Sort of an interest in what am I going to do after I finished college. I was studying a creative media production course, a BTEC, which it was enjoyable, but not something I wanted to do for a living. I went into it curious about what it was actually like on a day-to-day. And that told me that I don't actually enjoy it on a day-to-day.
Right.
So I was in my final year of college, and I saw this writing event called NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, which is a global online group where every November people try and write about 50,000 words a minimum to sort of get that first draft out of the way.
Is that still going?
That's still going.
Amazing. Yeah, what's it called again?
NaNoWriMo.
Wow. Okay. Nice.
Yeah,
okay, it's a really nice way to engage people in writing, and I guess is it some kind of forum where you can speak and read each other's stories and stuff?
Yes. So it's a forum. It's kind of like a social media for writers. So they would sort of tell you how on track you should be, and then there were sort of localized group chats as well. So there were a few in the West Midlands, which I didn't go to because I was a teenager, but people would meet up and have little writing sessions together. And a few people even book out like a hotel for the final night just to sort of really crunch down and get it done. Yeah, and I'm sure there are other things.
Let's not speculate on what happens in those hotel rooms on those writers' conventions. Good job you didn't go as a teenager, that's all I'm going to say. So you were engaged with this website, and the fact that there was this annual challenge of writing 50,000 words, was that your first sort of mountain or hill to climb with putting a body of work together.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was my first serious attempt. I think up until that point I had lots of ideas, and the thing about that period of my life is I was constantly thinking of ideas to write things, never actually using them. And despite my sort of previous plagiarism, I actually had a lot of anxiety about being unoriginal. So I would think of an idea, start to develop it, and I might share that with someone, or I might sort of ruminate it on a bit more, and I'd realise I'd actually stolen it from something else I consumed. And it got to the point where even inspiration, for me, was like, I was being unoriginal and I was stealing.
Interesting.
So I had a lot of sort of reservations and pressure on myself to be original, capital O original, whatever that means.
Well, or probably full capital letters. I think the thing is about originality is anything really original anymore? Or do we live in a world where everything's kind of been done, but the originality comes from doing it your own way? And I think anyone creative is going to relate to what you just said, because even subconsciously, we're always referencing everything that we've learned before us. And me as a previous choreographer, it's like I create choreography, I listen to music, and I create movement. And those phrases are unique to what I'm creating, but I'm completely and utterly influenced by all of my previous dance teachers, every choreographer I've ever worked with. Are you kind of stealing someone else's ideas and stuff? No. But is it fully original? It's difficult. And I'd say yes, it is. But it's interesting that you struggled with that, because I think most artists do. Like, they'll stand back and look. And what age were you at that point?
Gosh, well, I published it in 2017, 7 years ago, so I would have been 19. And then I started writing the previous November, if not a bit longer than that, actually. So I would have been 18. Yeah, I just finished college, really. Or I was at the tail end of college, so roughly 18, yeah.
So were there a lot of rough copies that you threw away because you didn't feel that they were original enough? How did you struggle with that?
I think I struggled with it by just writing constantly until I finally had something that felt okay, and sort of getting positive feedback from people when they didn't say, oh yeah, that reminds me of so-and-so. If I was compared to anyone, I instantly thought that, inadvertently or not, I was copying. And I've come to realise that I should just go over it and just write things that make me feel inspired, and not desperately search for something that can't be found. So yeah, I think that definitely sort of poisoned my perspective without realising it, and which is probably why it turned out the way it turned out.
I'm interested because you said that you were like asking other people what they thought, so you were sharing drafts with people. So you wasn't writing something secretly. You were very open about the fact that you were writing. You were sharing it with friends and family.
Absolutely, yeah.
So people then started to know that Liam, from a reader to a writer, Liam was a writer. Did that take on another sense of identity for you?
Oh, absolutely. It was almost as if I was a writer first and Liam second. It very much consumed my life to the point where day in, day out, as I said, I just finished college. I didn't get a job because I wanted to give myself 1 year to do this sort of lifelong dream of mine. So day in, day out, typing at a keyboard, trying to do as many words as possible every day and just have as much material as possible. Because I'd read that Stephen King writes 2,000 words every day. So I thought, if I want to be as successful as Stephen King, I have to write like Stephen King.
And you were shooting for the stars?
I think yes and no. I've always been a very pragmatic person. So I knew that my first ever self-published novella, wouldn't go on to make me famous. It's few and far between. But I still think secretly I was holding a candle out, just for the option of that. Wouldn't it be incredible to never need to go get a conventional job and to always do this passion of mine? Or at least what I thought this was a passion of mine.
I think that's a really nice way of thinking about things. You can't do anything not hoping that something good is going to come out of it, whether it's fame and success on a certain scale, or that book just connects with people, that people actually read it and connect with it. But also to have a pragmatic and realistic approach as well. So You sound very mature for an 18, 19-year-old who's writing your first piece of work. What's the book about?
So, here's how I used to describe it. It's like a supernatural Americana story with a fake investigator, a mysterious town, and a blood-soaked baby.
Oh my
So
God!
it's like I mentioned Stephen King, so I was very influenced by him. Like
so the thriller horror style is what it is.
Absolutely. I thought there's no way I'm going to write, War and Peace first try. So I wanted to sort of set my sights a little bit lower and think what actually works, what isn't some classic Russian novel from hundreds of years ago that I'll probably never write. So I went for a sort of horror thriller, and obviously I set it in America because I thought, well, that's where, they're all set right. Until years later that I realised, why didn't I just set it in England? I could have made it work.
But it's really interesting because I think there's been a change in the world and a change in publishing, because there were all of the big thrillers and the horrors especially were coming from the States. And they were also the ones that were then being adapted into TV or film. So as a young person consuming, it was all that we were consuming. And then you do naturally get influenced by that. People say, write what you know. So yeah, you should have written it in the UK. But were there any really big influential, people that you looked up to, writers at that time that were doing that style? Nowadays, there are more. I feel like, the publishing possibilities have opened up massively, and there are just more writers out there on the shelves, including lots of people from the UK that are probably doing that style as well. But back then there wasn't, so I can completely understand why you did that. But in hindsight, if you wrote that again, you would set it in the UK with not the main character called Chad or something. I don't know. I don't know what. It's really terrible that I haven't even read this book. But we're talking about you as a writer. I need to write the book. No, but
one copy in existence and not see the light of day.
That's actually gonna. Well, it does lead me to my other question, because you were writing. You're saying about it being published. It was self-published, right? But you were writing to get this published. You were writing to put it out there, and you were writing for it to be read.
Yes, yeah, that was my goal really. It wasn't I want to write a book. It was I want to publish a book and see if I actually have the ability to do so. There's I'm not sure who said it, but an author said that everyone can write at least one book.
Yeah, everyone's got one book in them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I can't remember who that was, but yeah, I've heard that before as well.
Yeah, so that was my goal. It wasn't just I want to write a novel, it was I want to publish it, I want to prove that I can do it. And then if I've done it, then I can do it again.
So talk me through how it was published. How did you go about even understanding how to self-publish a book and put it out there?
So NaNoWriMo was really useful for that. They have lots and lots of resources for aspiring authors, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I was actually recommended through a friend's dad's cousin's friend who was a self-published author.
Okay.
So he was recommended to me as not quite a mentor, but someone who had been there before. And he was able to assist me with actually formatting the manuscripts in a way that would be publishable on Amazon. He helped me produce the cover art, but there are just so many complications with the actual finishing of the project, I guess.
Yeah.
Where that really compounded why I don't feel so great about it anymore. Because the actual writing it was easy, but publishing it, that's hard. So
interesting. Did that change your perspective of writing?
I think it really illuminated to me why most writers have agents to do the work they don't want to do. And there are obviously lots of people who do self-publish and make a decent living off of it and eventually get a large amount of fame. Mm-hmm. But in terms of, for someone who had been out of school for a year, didn't have any money, had spent what little money he had on paying someone to format a manuscript, only for it to go backwards and forwards, where they would make edits to the actual text, and it was just a bad job, basically. It's a bad job.
So you were writing to publish from the get-go, and it was difficult, but you did publish. So this book is actually available, right? Is it still available now?
It's delisted from Amazon.
What does that mean?
So if you look on Amazon and Google it and find it.
What's the name of it?
Well, I think I still feel some shame about it, to be honest. I no longer identify as that person anymore.
Okay, we're going to get to that then. So you're not actually interested, as we sit here now, in anyone reading that, even if like 10,000 people were listening to this podcast and went, I'm going to go and order a copy. I really like Liam's vibe. I like what he's talking about, and I'm really interested to read this book. You wouldn't want that to be a thing now because you've moved on from that, right?
Yeah, and I think because there are so many bad feelings tied up with that book, I can't see any sort of reason to publish that. It's kind of like if you have a really bad photo review as a child, or you've got an awful haircut, even if other people found that haircut cool, you still wouldn't want them to see you with it. It's that personal sort of identification.
Interesting. So we are going to move on to why maybe you feel a bit of shame around it and why you don't identify as a writer. But what did it mean at that time to identify as a writer? And you said, really importantly, that writing was being a writer came first and being Liam kind of came secondary. Every other part of your personality was kind of put on the back burner in order for you to be a writer.
Absolutely, yeah. So
what did that mean?
Well, I think it was a very unsustainable way of living. I definitely wrote one book that way, but I don't think I could write another book that way.
And what was unsustainable about it? Give me some examples of what that looked like and felt like at the time.
It was a case of, like I say, like writing all day, from 9 till 9, occasionally eating, when I get hungry enough, and my body reminds me that I'm not just a pair of hands on a keyboard. I've got other things to get on with as well.
Yeah.
It was having a sort of mounting social pressure from my family to go get a job because, sure, writing a book is great and all, but so is having money for food and helping my family. So there was a lot of pressure that sort of slowly mounted, and then finally it got to the point where I said I'm just going to get it done. I just want to get it over with. I'm still not 100% happy with the final draft. I'm not happy with the way it was formatted. I'm not happy with anything really, and I just wanted to get over it and move on. And I think that's why I wouldn't want anyone to look at it. It's kind of like someone seeing, you in the hospital or something. That's not the best version of you. It's some damaged part of you. I'd rather not broadcast that.
Okay, so writing the book actually turned into something that was quite detrimental towards your health, your physical, mental health, your social health, because if you're writing stuck in a room all of that time, you're not seeing anybody, you're not seeing the outside world, or if you are, it's very rare.
Yeah.
So that becomes an imprisonment that you wanted to just finish and get rid of so you could move on.
Yeah, what was a lifelong dream became a sort of waking nightmare where it was never good enough. And by the time it was done, it was a bit like, you mentioned this was my first hill, my first mountain. It was like climbing a mountain only to realise the view wasn't worth it and that you just wasted all that time. So that's how I feel about it.
Wow. That's so interesting. I write a little bit, but I've never ever taken it seriously, and I've never wanted to be published. When I write, I always write for me, and that's it. It's not really about anybody else. You were writing from the start in order to be published and in order to be out there and in order to be read, and then you realised, wow, it's not worth the stress. I wonder how many other writers are out there that are actually writing now as their job and feel the same. Or whether it maybe came from the wrong place from the start. I don't know what the psychology of that is, but if you start from this is for me, if it ends for this is for you, then there is a natural evolution of this has come from somewhere positive. But if it starts with this is for you, and this is about commercial success, isn't it? This is like writers at commercial, so they write books in order to be published. That's the point. I wonder how much they feel the same thing. It's a huge mountain that they've just got to get to the top and get over.
Yeah, and then there's another mountain, another mountain.
And then when they're successful, that never ends.
Yeah, and in my experience, it was a case of, when I was writing stories just for myself, it was like a tap that was open all the time. I was constantly writing and just had all these really great ideas. And I'd write short stories, I'd write poems, I'd write all sorts of little vignettes, drafts and storyboards and that sort of thing. And then when it came time to actually settle on one, it was a case of, I want to be taken seriously. I don't want people to think, oh, I'm just writing because I'm writing. I want people to think he's doing this with a purpose, and I sort of avoid that sort of social judgment and pressure. But then once it had reached over a year, or, roughly a year, it definitely felt like, time is ticking, get it done now, or you're a failure. And I think part of that fed into my education and perception of myself, where, like, if I couldn't get something the first try, that would really upset me, in the sense that I wanted to be able to just do things without struggling, because I'd always been pretty good at doing things. So any sort of challenge I faced, such as having to read and edit a draft 10,000 times and look for a typo, it wasn't very conducive to a good experience. And I think that's why, by the end of it, it felt like less like I was publishing a book and more like I was sort of curing myself of some, like, disease that had taken over my life for a year.
Yeah, it sounds also like you took too much on yourself. I think writing a book, and you said rightly so, there are a lot of people involved in that, whether it's an editor or a bunch of editors, a publisher, an agent, and not having any of that and self-publishing. You did all of that yourself, which becomes a completely different job to writing. You are the writer, and then you have to step outside yourself and read the book and analyze it and make edits. It's not just about spelling and grammar. It's about structure. It's about, does this sentence make sense in that spot? Does that need to move? Do we need to pull this chapter shorter or move that chapter? And that comes from looking from the outside in. That's a very difficult thing to do when you're the writer as well. And it feels like you took all of that on yourself, and it was really overwhelming. And it became, if you didn't finish it, it became something that you failed at. So you just needed to get through it to finish it in order to close the book.
Absolutely.
And move on. So you closed the book. You finished it, not to your satisfaction, but that was a success for you because it was finished. You closed the book.
Say so.
Well, I don't know. You tell me. Was it a success because you said you didn't want to be a failure, so you had to finish it?
Yeah, but even though I finished it, I still felt like it was a failure.
Okay.
Not because it didn't sell very well, not because it has an average rating of 2.7, not because, most of the people who bought it were people who knew I was writing it. I think the only anonymous purchase I got was someone who gave it a 1 out of 5. And that really upset me at the time. Why couldn't they see my genius?
Yeah.
But I think I've sort of thawed out that mindset, and I've finally, realised it's actually not that great. It's not as bad as I used to think it was, but it's worth a 2.7,
Is it worth more?
I don't know. It's really difficult for me to read it, because I read it and it's like, I don't know, just saying like, oh, that could be better, that could be better, that could be better. I become very critical of it, if that isn't obvious.
Well, I think that's obvious, but I also think that you were very young. And as a creative person who has always created everything, mainly dance and theatre, but that's what I've done from a very young age. And I've got things that I've created shows and recorded them and run a stage school and done little shows with the kids and stuff and put on these like full-blown performances in college and stuff like this. And I look back at that stuff and I cringe because I was 19 years old. And at 19 years old, I thought I was an adult that knew about the world and was a complete and utter go-getter and was like really motivated and thought that everything that I was doing was like great. And then you look back and with hindsight and you go, oh my God, I was such a child and I knew nothing about life. And your art is only coming from what you know about life. So what do you know at 19? Stop giving yourself such a hard time is what I'm trying to say.
I think other people have told me this, and I think in some ways I am more compassionate to 19-year-old Liam.
Good.
And they do say that you shouldn't kill the part of you that makes you cringe. You should kill the part of you that cringes.
That's a really, really, come on, take your own advice there. That is a really good way of looking at it, for sure. Why would you cringe at a 19-year-old Liam? You were just doing whatever it is that 19-year-old Liam needed to do at that time.
Yes, yeah, it definitely was what I needed to do, for better or worse. But I think the sort of burnout of that experience is why I haven't written anything since. And I think at this point, I haven't written for as long, in terms of years, as when I was writing. Roughly 11 to roughly 19.
Yeah.
It's been roughly 7 years since then, and I haven't had a single idea. I haven't wanted to write at all, and I haven't really looked at that book unless it's like come up in conversation, or if I just happen to see the one physical copy in the world at my dad's house.
So you've had 7 years of not being a writer. How was the transition from you identifying as a writer so strongly, whether it was just even for that year that you were writing, into another part of Liam?
It was a very destructive process, I think, in the sense that so much of my identity and sort of prolificity was about the fact that I read and I wrote and I was, very literary. And then the whole experience kind of put me off reading and put me off writing. And then I basically felt like I'd spent a year from finishing education to now not doing really anything worthwhile, nothing to show for. And then it was time to get a job, and I didn't go to university because I would have done creative writing, which might have been bad, might have been good, difficult to say. But I basically just got minimum wage jobs and tried to work hard and tried to just move on from it. But I felt very sort of listless,
What would your family and friends say? I mean, you would still have to speak about it, because surely they were asking, are you going to write something else? Are you still, what were they asking about that? Were you having to bat them off and be like, no, I'm not writing anymore? How was that?
I mean, I wouldn't say I felt hugely supported when I was writing. So then once it was done, the sort of questioning kind of stopped. There were a few times where people would ask me, do you have any ideas, or are you planning to, I'd talk about how I wanted to rewrite it and make it better. And I probably would have done that until the end of time if I let myself.
Yeah.
But most, it was kind of you can hold on to broken glass or you can let it go, and I just let it go.
Yeah, but you let it go in a really extreme way. You let it go completely. It was something that you distanced yourself from, would you say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You would physically and emotionally distance yourself from, I am no longer a writer, I am no longer even a reader. You actually stopped reading as well.
Yeah, I think in retrospect, I felt like I didn't deserve to be either of those things because I'd failed at both. All the reading I'd done hadn't made me a good writer, and all the writing I'd done was I think even now I don't feel that strongly about it, but at the time it was kind of this was the future that I wanted, and it was a total failure. So I just didn't deserve to be associated with it.
Wow, you really did give yourself a hard time. Do you still give yourself a hard time, as hard as that, in other areas, or are you a little bit easier on yourself now? Because it feels like you expect a lot of yourself, which I completely understand. I absolutely empathise with that. I've got high standards of myself, and I expect a lot from myself. But over time, you also learn to give yourself a break sometimes. Are you learning that a little bit?
I think sometimes I act more compassionate to myself in work or in social situations, but there is always a mindset of, if other people can do it, why can't you? And if you can do it, why can't you do it better? Why aren't you improving? So I feel like if you're ever going to be something, you've got to really work at it all the time. But I'm not really working at anything at the moment. I'm not trying to be a creative. I'm not trying to be, some identity. I think really I'm trying to have a sort of label-less existence, in the sense that I don't want to be consumed by things the way writing and reading used to consume me. I think I want to be more sort of diluted in that sense, and have lots of interests and lots of things that I do. I like to be lots of things lots of times.
I think that's the perfect makeup of a human being. We are multifaceted. We are really should have lots of interests, and it's always changing and always evolving. but certain things definitely take on real significance and importance in one's identity, and reading firstly and then writing certainly did for you. But it's interesting that now it's like the furthest thing that you want to identify from is being a writer, but also you don't even want to explore anything else being significant. You'd rather just be like, where everything is like a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but I'm not going to go into too much detail about anything in order for it to take over as much as writing did, because there feels like a grief and a trauma around like that book and what it did to you, and everything that you gave to get it out there, and the fact that you wasn't happy or proud of it. You don't feel like it was your best work.
I think grief is a very apt word to describe it.
Yeah.
So it felt like, the death of a whole version of me, the death of a whole future, and the death of the past as well. If those were the things I anchored myself to as a person, I no longer had an anchor, and I was kind of left just sort of drifting.
Do you feel now that part of that old self that's gone, can you look back at that with hindsight and with a better understanding of why it was so important and significant at the time?
I can definitely understand it.
Yeah.
I hesitate to say I can understand it in the way that doctors don't understand a disease, in the sense that...
Well, you've said that twice. You've already said that it was like a disease twice. Like it was like a disease. It's like really extreme.
Yeah.
It was something that you liked. It was your passion.
Yeah.
But it turned into being...
language, it's just the writer in me. Yeah, I think I still like to dramatise things, but it definitely does feel like something that was so pervasive and invasive. I definitely feel like, as much as I am glad that I did it, I'm also not glad that I did it. In the sense that if I'd never wrote a book, the sort of idea that, maybe I will one day, it's kind of like the dream is more pleasant than the reality. Even if we all know that you shouldn't just live in dreams.
But you've gone back to reading. You read now, because there was a period of time where you wouldn't even pick up a book. You literally turned your back on literature completely. But now you are reading again?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But the sort of things I read has completely changed. So, part of that is just growing older and my taste changing. I used to read a lot of thrillers and horror and war books and that sort of thing. And now I'm just mostly read like classic literature and non-fiction, sociology, psychology, that sort of thing. And if I really sort of psychoanalyze that, maybe it's because I'm reading things that are very unique and original and iconic. So I'm reading things that I wanted to make. I'm not reading airport novels and TikTok books of the week, if you know what I mean. Not to disparage people that do.
Well,
I'm
there's...
also above them, so...
Okay, so you've got some confidence back. That's good.
If anything, it's a complex, but yeah.
No. This like fast consumption world of like, it's a problem in all art forms, in book form, in Netflix form. It's like people are just wanting to get the most views as quickly as possible, and then it goes in the bin and it moves on. So talking about those classic books, those timeless books, I absolutely understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, we live in a world now where people are going for the quick buck, and consumerism is just on a fast turnaround all the time. It's frustrating.
That's quite prevalent in the classic literature that I've read.
Yeah.
So you've got Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea, you've got John F. Kennedy's A Confederacy of Dunces, and many other books where the main protagonist of those books is a writer that is failing. And I realised completely accidentally I was reading things I could strongly relate to.
The protagonist.
I think the authors probably felt the same way about themselves.
Yeah.
One of my favourite writers, John Steinbeck, who wrote The Grapes of Wrath and East of Eden, in the notes of the manuscript for East of Eden, which was his sort of magnum opus. He'd published many books and stories beforehand. Mm-hmm. He said that this is the only book I've ever written. Everything else has been nothing.
Interesting.
So it might be a very common mindset that even successful writers have.
I think so. And I think you said something earlier that's why I sort of wondered if there were any writers listening. Like, do they feel the same? Even successful writers, commercially successful writers, I'm sure will relate to those feelings. Because as an artist, I don't think you feel that your art is ever fully finished anyway, but a book has to be finished. It has to be printed and bound and put on the shelf to buy. And does that writer really always feel comfortable with putting it out there at that point? Or is it some commercial arm that's just saying, look, just get it out there and move on because we need to sell this now?
There is a sort of inherent conflict between the creative and the commercial.
Yeah.
And you can't have a writer that just spends his whole life writing and never publishing anything.
Of course.
But on the opposite, you can't also have a commercial publisher that just publishes absolute slop that's like generated by AI. That's just monkeys on typewriters.
Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a middle ground. So I think that you've started to read again, which is great. And I think that maybe one day, because you are still so young, how old are you?
I'm only 26.
You're 26 years old.
26.
You are a very smart, intelligent, wise 26-year-old, but you still are a 26-year-old, which is really young in the scheme of things. You could get to the age of 50 and go, okay, I need to write again. And you can have that urge again. It's there's something in you that I feel like could come back. But maybe not yet. Maybe 7 years is not long enough for that to happen, because it feels like you're still carrying a lot of trauma around that experience, which is a shame.
Yeah, I think maybe healing will be part of, if it is a trauma, I think the way to heal it would be writing again. And recently I have been getting sort of embers of ideas, just things that interest me. Ideas that I would never have had previously.
Like? Can you give me some examples?
Like poetry, for example.
Yeah.
I've always struggled to enjoy poetry.
Oh, I love poetry.
I think I enjoy poems, but to actually sit down and dissect one, I think because I'm so used to just turning pages.
Yeah.
So that's something that's been on my mind.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder, now you're starting to feel maybe writing could take a different sort of journey through poetry, or you're even starting to read things that are different to what you read before or enjoyed before. How much of that is because of that experience of you as a writer?
I think it's inevitable. Yeah, I think another part of it is that when I was younger, I just didn't have any life experience. Whereas now I'm a little bit older and I do have some more life experience. They always say, write what you know. And when I was younger, it felt like I knew nothing. And that's why I was constantly looking for original ideas. The one thing that no one else had done somehow. Even though really, like you said earlier, basically everything's been done. And what we do is we retell things or we re-choreograph things. Every note on a guitar or a piano has been played.
Mm-hmm. Just not in the sequence you're going to play them. And not with
yes.
your heart. Absolutely.
I think the big thing that's changed in terms of what I would write if I wrote again in the future versus what I used to want to write is I used to be very plot driven. And I think now I'm very people driven. Because I think, people are very interesting. Everyone's very interesting. Even if they're not immediately
Some
interesting.
people more than others.
That's it, yeah. Yeah, well, even uninteresting people can be uninteresting in an interesting way.
Absolutely.
Someone who's so mundane, who makes, beige seem like an interesting colour.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, thinking about who you are now and what you want to do, you said that you didn't really feel there was one specific thing that defines you, that you're quite happy to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that and explore and stuff, which I think is a really lovely way to be. But what are your aspirations for the future? What do you want to do in the next sort of 5 years? Who do you want Liam to be?
It's a very deep question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah,
We're getting deep on this show.
I think I'd like to be... What would I like to be? I'd like to be someone who knows what they want to be, maybe. I'd like to be sort of in a more established point in my career. I'd like to have a sort of more rounded life, I think. I think I'm still very much a person of extremes, although I'm not as extreme as I used to be. So I've toned down the extremity a little bit. But I think I'd like to be much more well-rounded and not sort of jump into things very intensely and then fizzle out quite quickly.
Yeah, life is really about finding a balance, isn't it? And I've struggled being a workaholic and then burning myself out working too hard and then saying, wow, I've not really been social because I've been working so hard, so let me go and see some friends and family and be social, and then take that to the extreme where I'm actually skipping work because I'm out all weekend and partying too hard and being too social, spending too much money, and then going back and like, I've constantly been on that seesaw, and I've only really found the balance probably the last 5-6 years, something like that. It's been very recent, but
that's why I said earlier that the way I was writing that book was very unsustainable, because it's not something I could do for more than a year, let alone a lifetime.
Yeah.
And I think I want a more considered, compassionate approach to life, because that will inevitably yield greater fruit than, rushing to plant seeds and everything.
Yeah, and your identity doesn't need to be based on one specific thing, like I am a writer or I am a reader, I am I'm into literature or something. It can be a number of things. It doesn't have to be that one thing. So it was that one thing, but it's good you've discovered that. It's good. So you haven't got a book for us to read?
I'm afraid not, no.
Will there be in the future anything that you want to offer the world, whether it's in a book, whether it's music, whether it's something? Do you feel that you would ever want to offer something being published again, or did that experience just say, actually from now on I'm going to do things for myself rather than to put out there for other people?
I think, to be compassionate to my current self and future self, I should give myself the room to be able to grow and not put myself in a box. So there's always the option of something in future. I think if I want to do it, I will. It just depends on what I'm able to do. Like I said, there have been a couple of ideas that I've had, and it's just a case of like letting myself slowly explore them as opposed to sort of rushing them like I used to. And I think where I used to feel like I was almost on fire with ideas, and it's kind of like I'm slowly growing something. Yeah. As opposed to trying to write something before it burns.
There's no rush for anything really. And I think the thing that you've probably learned is to be more kind and compassionate to yourself. So don't forget that. Take that forward. Yeah. Who am I to say? We all need to do that. Like it's not like I'm sitting here as some expert where I'm always kind and compassionate to myself. I'm not at all, but it's the one thing that we should be, and especially people like yourself that give yourself a hard time or expect so much from yourself, which is what I've been hearing today. Just give yourself a break.
Yeah, I'll try. I could definitely see myself in future helping people edit their work. I've always been very good at sort of taking in information and condensing it and sort of helping it be almost refined and pure. So I actually found the editing of my book very enjoyable, almost as enjoyable as the writing. It was very time consuming. Yeah. But I think it would be nice as well to work on other people's work and give them, what I didn't have, which was a sort of honest and open set of eyes, and see what works and what doesn't, and sort of enable them. So maybe I'd work as an editor. Who knows? Yeah, it sounds like something that you could explore for sure. Definitely. Yeah. Well, Liam, thank you so much for talking to me today. I feel like I've got to know you a lot better, and I feel like the significance of you identifying as a writer was a really interesting topic to explore, because I feel like I know you a lot better, and I know how you've carried that through to your adult life. So thank you so much for being open and sharing that. I used to be a writer, and maybe someday I will be again. There you go. Watch this space. All right.
Watch this space indeed. Knowing Liam as well as I do, I know that when he finds his niche, he is going to be unstoppable. And I look forward to supporting my friend in whatever venture is next for him. What I found most interesting about our conversation was just how much emphasis was put on his identity of being a writer, and what that did to him when he felt that he'd failed. Being a writer became all-encompassing for him, and that seemed to be taken to the extreme with the way that he identified. So it was really nice to hear that he was trying to live a more balanced and less extreme life and be kinder to himself, a lesson I think we could all take forward. Thank you, Liam, for your honest and open account of what was clearly a very difficult time. To keep up to date with all the latest episodes, please remember to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra generous, please also remember to share this podcast with loved ones. I really do rely on you, the listeners, to build our community and keep this podcast going. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you very soon on another episode.